and show you what it's like for us to record this podcast. And if you guys want to comment any questions as we're going along, we may have the ability to look over there and incorporate that into the episode. You guys ready?
Yeah, ready to hit it.
Let's do it. I'm Chris Justin.
And I'm Ethan Janney. And on today's episode, we have Corey Zhu. He is a software developer and entrepreneur. These days, he mostly works on SaaS Pegasus, the Django SaaS boilerplate. He also made Place Card Me, which is becoming the best way to make printable place cards on the internet. Corey, welcome to our program.
Yeah, thanks. It's good to be here.
Yeah, what time is it there? You're in South Africa, right?
Yeah, I'm in Cape Town. It's a little after 6. So you're catching me towards the end of my day. Hopefully, I'm not too
reasonable,
not too tired.
Good, looking solid.
Yeah, you're looking good.
Got a nice tan. Right.
Yeah, that's the sun here. I thought about opening a beer for this podcast, but then I decided that would be a little unprofessional. So.
I mean, you're not going to offend us. It's noon over here.
The point is just the time it takes to go get
it. Yeah. Corey, looking through your bio and what you've done, I was very impressed with some of the decisions that you made, and I'm eager to hear about how you got to where you're at now with your multiple projects. As a non-technical person, a non-coding person, I should say, half of the acronyms in here, I don't even know what Django is, so you'll have to explain some of that for our listeners. But our podcast, as you probably know, and most listeners know at this point, is about new business ideas from established entrepreneurs. And you've got one that you'd like to share with our listeners. Tell us about the idea that you would like them to run with.
Yeah, sure. And I'll preface this by saying, like, I think this is a very boring business idea, and I think that's like probably a good thing in that,
Yeah, we love boring business ideas.
Yeah, well, like there's this. I don't know if you guys have seen it. There's this talk by Jason Cohen that has like become famous in these sort of like bootstrapper startup circles, where he talks about like sort of like the best way to come up with or to run a business. And one of his things is that it should be like a business to business thing, and that it should be like he's got this whole checklist, and I think this idea checks a lot of the boxes on that checklist, even if it's boring, which is why I don't want to run with it myself, I guess. But so the idea in a nutshell is performance review software. And so basically what that means is like software that would allow companies to run their sort of like performance review process better, more efficiently, save them time, save them pain. And yeah, I mean, I could sort of dive into why I think it's a good idea.
Can you give us an example? Because it sounds like this might have come from some personal experiences. So like an example of a place where you either had to put together performance software, or you wish you had some, or you wish it was better.
Yeah, for sure. So the company that I still work for today part-time, but have spent the majority of my career with, that I was CTO of for 10 years. We ran these performance reviews. We still run these performance reviews on sort of like a semi-annual cadence. And like the way it works is you have managers who are like collecting feedback from a bunch of people. So let's say you've worked with like 7 people on a particular team. The manager like reaches out to those 7 people, asks them for feedback about you. Then they like collate that together. There's like a scoring matrix. They sort of like put that all together and then deliver this. And then they write up, of course, like a lot of their own thoughts about you. And then they deliver this to you as like, a Google Doc essentially. And so for a long time, we were doing that by hand, sort of just like, sending out the emails and pasting things in. We eventually cobbled together this set of tools built on Google Sheets and Google Forms and like a custom Google script that I wrote that would sort of like allow you to collect feedback, and then it would, see the thing in the spreadsheet and email your manager, and sort of like it was this. But I know like one of my sort of role models in the entrepreneurial space is Patio 11, Patrick McKenzie. I don't know if you guys have heard of him. But one of his things is like, anytime you see a spreadsheet that's doing like a complicated workflow in a business, that's like ripe for building a new product and disrupting like, that system. And so like all these businesses, I would imagine, are doing things like my company was doing. They're probably doing them with some level of technology, but if you could sort of save them time, save them effort in running this whole process, smoother and more efficiently, I think you could charge them for that.
Yeah, from a sales perspective, I like the fact that it has the word performance in the topic. So it's like more performance reviews. Why are you doing them? To increase performance. Have this software helps you increase performance. So definitely like that aspect. What were you going to say, Chris?
Yeah, I'm wondering why this doesn't exist already, or why the way that you're presenting it doesn't already exist.
It totally exists, and so like, but I think there's a specific part of the market.
Cut off the episode right now. This
let's go get that beer.
God, I should have Googled this before I started.
So it's the site where you type in your question and the answers pop up from all the websites in the world. I think it's going to be great. I'm going to call it.
Oh man, that's a great product idea.
I'm going to call it Google.
Yeah, no, so it does exist, but I still think there's like a good opportunity to sort of serve a particular part of the market. So what does exist are like HR management suites. So there's like a product called Bamboo HR, I think. There's another one called like Appraise. I think there's a bunch of them. But to use them, you sort of have to buy into their like entire way of running an HR thing. So they like expect you to use them for onboarding and for, I don't know what all these
payroll, probably
payroll maybe, I'm not sure.
Disputes between employees. You take my parking spot.
But like most companies, or at least like most companies I've seen, these systems grow organically over time. And so like, when you're like a 3-person company, you're not like getting the fancy like HR management all in one package. So you end up sort of like home growing a lot of these things. And then you don't want to shift over wholesale to like some enterprise tool. You want to be able to sort of like pull the specific thing you need for the specific problem you're trying to solve. And so like I think this would fill a specific gap in that sort of like HR space for a company who like started cobbling these things together on, Google Sheets and just like the company I work for does.
One concern that immediately jumps to mind, I'm going to throw out an injection. You don't have to feel obligated to answer it yourself, but performance reviews, you mentioned they happen typically on a biannual basis. And if this were a monthly model, a SaaS model, I can imagine some people don't feel great about paying for 10 months out of the 12 where they're not using the software. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a valid point. You could obviously just like only charge annually, for example. I don't know if people would be into that, but that's like one way you could work around that. I think another thing is, and this would require, and this is actually one of the things one of the challenges I see with the product, and one of the reasons why I haven't worked on it is like, you could say like, no, you should actually be collecting feedback every week or every 2 weeks or every month. Like, we're gonna like, not only are you like buying the software to help you do this thing, but we're like teaching you how to like build a better system that involves more continuous feedback and more sort of like real-time responses, and just like everybody's sort of like more in tune with like everything else that's going on. And so if you were able to like convince an organization like, oh, actually we shouldn't be running these like, heavy biannual processes or semi-annual processes, we should actually have this sort of like more fluid, agile, feedback and performance system. Then you could convince people to do it monthly, but then you sort of get into this like customer education space where you're trying to convince people to use your software in a very specific way that is probably like at odds with how they're currently doing performance reviews. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges I see with the idea.
I'm thinking like gamification, something like that. Like that's coming to mind for me for how to keep this thing alive and make it worth it on a monthly basis. And maybe it's even the way to introduce people to why it's useful. Instead of saying, oh, you need a performance review software that you pay for monthly, like buy it today. You know, you could say, oh, you ready for your next performance review? Use our software. It's free, you know, and they do their first performance review, they set it in motion, and then you start introducing these, well, look, an employee can get 10 points for, you know, this, or, you know, you can get this, a boss can get 10 points for this or whatever.
Ethan,
and,
sorry, I gotta say, for a man who like hates, for a dude who hates like the man controlling him in some way, you love gamification.
Wait, why is that a man controlling someone?
It's like I don't know, subconscious influencing or like manipulating. Some people are out there saying that. That's an aside.
No, that's very interesting, actually. I have an interesting thing to say. Now we're going on a tangent here, but
I love the tangent. That's fine.
I really found the value of, for example, rules at Burning Man. So at Burning Man, they have like these interesting things going on where they're art installations, and like they had this thing called the Hug Deli. And one person would go up to one side and they would order from a menu of like different types of hugs you could have. And then they would have like, they could have a bear hug, or like a bear hug, and then be side dishes, like a kiss on the cheek. And so anyways, it was this kind of fun little installation. And when you came back to it later after being a client of the Hug Cafe, a Hug Deli, you realize that the people on the other side of it were not like employees of the Hug Deli. They were just like you could go walk and be on the other side of the Hug Deli. It was just like a scenario with rules, and it was fun, you know, and it was cool. And it wasn't like rules didn't make it bad. Rules made it fun. Rules made what it is. So I think, you know, gamification, if you like games, like they don't have to be to appease somebody else. They can literally make things fun.
Fair enough. Thanks for indulging us here, Corey.
No, I was going to say that sounds like a good feature, except I think the HR reps at the company would probably not support the Hug Deli. They might.
The Hug Deli, yeah. Yeah, we don't need to include that in the software.
I am glad though, Corey, that you brought up the idea of more regularly giving and getting feedback. That's something that I'm a big believer in general. And I think that part of the problem or part of the opportunity with performance reviews is not just that the tools that people use to conduct performance reviews aren't great. I think that performance reviews in general are not a great tool for getting the most value out of your employees. I remember back in my corporate days, it would be a semi-annual meeting or even an annual meeting, and you come October and you're like, oh my God, these are the expectations that you had for me. We haven't talked about this. I forgot all about this stuff when we're too busy like firefighting problems that we had. So I get excited about the idea of something that will get more value out of the employees, allow them to grow more, allow them to contribute more to the organization. I do think that as you alluded to, it requires a little bit more of a sell to the organization to get them to change their behaviors. But I do think that with the quantified self movement, and people are doing this on their own, a lot of times people within corporations will hire their own coach sometimes to get better. So if you can find leaders within the organization who buy into that idea, maybe that you can start with a cohort.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think if you have if you can convince yourself that you have a better way to do this, and you can like, you know, demonstrate that seems both like, you know, a really big asset for the product and like a good marketing hook as well, because then you can just like write blogs about this like awesome new like continuous feedback thing that you are fostering, and then just like be like, oh, by the way, if you want to try this thing out at your company, like we happen to have the software that does this really, really well, like you might be interested in that.
I'm picturing an action step where someone could start as a consultant and go to companies and say, hey, I'll help you implement these projects project planning tools like Getting Things Done or a 12-week year, different frameworks that are already out there. I'll help your teams apply them, and then you can see what works, where people are falling through the cracks, and then build the software based on a proven system that you've had to manually manage for, I don't know, a few companies.
Yeah, totally. I think that's how I would try to roll this out. Cause like, so I have this sort of like insider view of one company and how that company does it. And the risk there is that like I would overfit this product to that particular company and that particular sort of like workflow. And really you want like, ideally you probably want a bunch of those. I don't know how many would be enough to sort of give you some sort of like generalized perspective of you know, how to make the software fit the like a more general use case and you know, solve people's problems better. But I agree, like that consulting model and you know, like doing things that don't scale and doing a lot of this stuff sort of by hand, just to sort of understand what the product is would be a good first step, and hopefully something you could get people to pay you to do also.
So is this project, and I know you probably have a bias because you have maybe more or all your experience in, what is this, bootstrapped or funded? Do you imagine?
I mean, I actually really only think about bootstrapped ideas that like I think I could pull off by myself. I think there's probably two versions of this, and I'm sure there are many funded companies that are doing stuff in this space. I mean, like HR in general, like, you know, like there's a bunch of like sort of like recruiting software type of platforms. There's sort of like back office stuff. Like, so a lot of these companies, they're sort of like very prototypical, like Y Combinator, you know, like business to business, solve some business need that like every company has. And that's like if you're successful, then it's like $100 million company or something like that. So I think there's probably two versions. There's the slow bootstrap version and then the rocket ship funded version.
Maybe we could go into, just for a second, your experience with PlaceCardMe, because that is a business where it's just you, right? I mean, there's nobody. Do you even outsource, or how does that business run?
No, it's just me. Every single, with the exception of Dimagi, the company I'm talking about, everything I do is just me. So yeah,
I mean, pull that off with PlaceCardMe, and yeah, what is it? Is it just you just like do coding every day, or did you do all the coding up front and now it's all running itself?
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, now it totally runs itself. I mean, I'll respond to like, well, in COVID times, it's pretty easy to keep it running because there's not a lot of people using it. But you know, pre-COVID and you know, it's starting to trickle back up for better or for worse. You know, I'll respond to a support email a day. Maybe it takes like 5-10 minutes, but that's basically all I do, and that it just sort of sits there and runs itself. In terms of the whole, like getting to that point, it was a mix. Like I tried to, I think, so technology people and like software developers tend to err on the side of too much coding and not enough of the other stuff. And so I had to be very disciplined about not just letting myself code and like keep building stuff. So I sort of like, I tracked my time and I broke it down into product development and marketing as just like two separate categories. And I would constantly look at it. And if I would try to keep them basically about the same. And so if I saw like, oh wait, I'm spending too much time on product development, then I would be like, okay, like I know I want to like build that feature, but I should really like write this blog post instead, because like that is the better way to move the needle on traffic and whatnot. So it was a lot of wearing both hats and shifting back and forth and trying to sort of like do that all the time.
That's a great insight, actually. I mean, I've heard that several places where people talk about bootstrapping, that there are sort of these two main categories of product and marketing, you know, and I do often hear people saying, I work on product on Mondays and marketing on Tuesdays, you know, or I work on product, you know, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and marketing on Tuesday, Thursday, or whatever. but that those are kind of just the key levers, and you can't ignore one for the other.
Yeah, I think that's right. Maybe if your product is so good it markets itself, but that's quite rare, I think.
The pipe dream.
Yeah.
How do you think about pricing and when it comes to this product? And I think when we start talking through that, we can unravel the structure of how the implementation would actually work. But yeah, just off the top of your head, if you were to charge for this service, both as a consultant and for the software itself, how would you do so?
Yeah, it's a good question. I haven't thought too much about the consulting side of it, but I'm sure I would offer it as a discount, because the main value would be sort of just like proving willingness to pay and getting the learnings from whatever you learn from how that organization does this. For the software, I mean, I think like there's a couple options. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts. Like, I think you'd either charge sort of like a fixed amount for the whole company per month or per year, depending if you wanted to do a monthly or an annual thing. Or you could do some sort of prorated thing based on how many employees they have. The latter is probably gonna make you a lot more money in the long term if you can get sort of like bigger companies on board. I imagine just charging the company a flat fee to start is probably going to be easier to just get early customers. And in general, the way I think about pricing is like, it should always be fluid. And so I would imagine you would start somewhere and then you'd sort of adjust based on, if you want more customers, you lower the price. If you want more money, you raise the price, and kind of try to hone in on an optimal price point as you sort of figure out the market.
But if we were to, we can each take a stab at it, throw out a number per employee. What would you say?
100 million per employee?
That's low, man. Yeah.
I mean, I think if I was bootstrapping and I was just starting it out, trying to get my first 10 customers, I would charge something like $50 to $100 per company per month.
Per month.
Per employee.
Per company.
No, per month. Per company per month.
Per company per month. Okay.
Yeah, and again, like just because I do everything myself, and so like if I can get $1,000 a month added to my like passive income, or then that's like a nice starting place to then sort of like figure out how to change the pricing or something like that.
And that's for I want to parse this out. So if I'm charging $50 to $100 per company per month, right? Regardless of the number of employees, or are you shooting for a certain?
Maybe I'd say like under 200 employees or
Under
something.
200 employees.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about my company size, because I think at a certain size, obviously, like the company just can afford to spend way more than that.
Right.
And
so if it's $50, $100 per company per month, and then at that point, that's primarily the software. You're just kind of facilitating that for them, and not sort of, being the consultant or what happens?
Yeah, I think so. And actually, what I would probably do also is I would create like a consulting package to get their data in the system. Because most of these companies are probably using something for their like HR management system. Like we use Salesforce. There's like a bunch of these things, and like you're gonna need to like link their sort of like HR database into the system. So maybe I charge them like a $5,000 setup fee, which is just like, well, those numbers actually now seem like kind of out of whack. But some kind of setup fee to get their data in the system, so that because that's another barrier as well, as like they're going to be like if they want to try this thing, they're going to be like, well, all of our data is over in this other thing, and I have no idea how to export the blah 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 and set up like the org chart or whatever. So I think if you can make that as easy as possible and make that sort of like a consulting add-on, I think that would be a good.
The other side of the pricing question is the value that it provides to the company. I'm thinking about this also from a sales perspective of how I would start approaching companies, even if nothing were built, and maybe I just wanted to start consulting, or a listener wanted to do this. I would, to me, the opportunity that this idea solves is reducing turnover and increasing effectiveness. Those are the two big levers that get improved. And we've previously talked on this podcast about how expensive it is to replace an employee. That can be tens of thousands of dollars. It usually is, especially, I mean, even more at big software companies. So that's one. And then two, if you're increasing the productivity of an employee, it's very well known that people are most productive right before their deadlines. And typically, like if you've got your end of year review, people will crank out, 50% more work to be able to finish it all off before that time. So if you can somehow tie it to, hey, we've created a system where employees are able to be much more productive throughout the year, every one of your employees is now doing the work of 1.5 employees. That sounds pretty good. And doing it in a way where they feel more valued and they're not getting run down. So that's how I would try and sell it. And I think that
I would add on.
Go for it. No, go for it.
I would also add on, like, I think you can also position it potentially as a time saver. Like I think at least in my sort of N of one companies that I've seen, like there's just a lot of time and churn spent on the nuts and bolts of this process that if you say like these managers their time is really valuable. And if they're spending, 3 hours just sort of like collating feedback from different places and pasting it into a doc and whatever else, that their 3 hours of their time should be worth, more than $50. So I think that's like a third, I think that's the third part of the sales is like, you're going to get better retention, maybe better performance, hopefully, and save people time.
Yeah, it makes sense. What are some of the barriers that you anticipate if you were to approach a company with this idea?
Probably the biggest one I could imagine is that, well, maybe that they already have some process that they're sort of like very attached to, even if it's not so efficient. But yeah, I'm not sure. In my head, there's more product risk than sales risk, but I'm not sure if that's right. But like, I think the bigger problem is like the way that they do performance reviews. Like you can't just like fit that into your software. Like maybe like performance reviews are so specific at every company that it's like literally impossible to build something that is this generic that is useful to them. And that's why like the only things that exist are these sort of like all-in-one packages. Maybe.
I wonder if there's any way to sell performance review software through the employees, like get them on board that, oh, hey, I like this system. This would work for me, whatever incentive you offer as a performance review software, rate your boss, like I remember when I was teaching in the university, they had rate my professor, students would take full discretion to do, say whatever they wanted, really. But yeah, not exactly that you would do things like that, but just make it appealing to the workforce, and then they go, hey, so, we'll appreciate this, we'll enjoy this if our employers implement this.
I like that a lot. I've been thinking about it from a very like top-down perspective, but I think like if you could sort of convince the employees and then create the demand bottom up, that would be like even better. I know like companies like Slack and have sort of infiltrated workplaces that way.
I definitely think that employees would love the idea of rate my boss, and they would have a field day, and it would probably make people feel very uncomfortable, but maybe in a good way. Like it makes some progress within the organization to kind of mix things up a little bit. but that's my
Yeah, you'd have to be very, because you need the bosses to be happy too. So you need to be very careful about sort of how you would pull something like that off.
Yeah.
But I think it's possible.
I know there are companies that that do this, pay for services that are similar to Rate My Boss, and there are companies on the other side that actually offer those services. They don't call it that; it's a little bit more sophisticated. But every year when I was at Shell, they had the Shell People Survey, and it would take you 10 minutes or 15 minutes to go through, and you'd answer questions like, "How do you feel? Do you feel like your work is valued? Do you feel like your boss understands you? If you notice an issue, how comfortable are you being able to bring it up?" Things like that. And I'm making up some of the questions, but 100 different questions like that. And at the end, they anonymously tally the scores, and you can see people's scores broken down at each manager level. So if there's a manager that's consistently getting a 3 out of 10 in terms of trust, employees being able to believe that if they do the work that the manager asks, that they will be rewarded appropriately or something like that. It's very easy to point that out on a yearly basis.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
So how would you approach the potential clients? What's the best way to get to them, to access them? Do you have any ideas there?
That's tough. I mean, I think to start, I would try to go through my network, like I would call up my friends and say like, how does your company do this? And can I talk to someone? And that's how I would sort of like validate the idea and decide if I really wanted to pursue it. And then at scale, I think, I don't know. I mean, like, I guess it's probably going to be a sales model, which probably means you're sort of like finding companies and doing cold outreach and a lot of stuff that I have no desire to do, which is one of the reasons why you can run with this idea. Maybe that sounds fun to you, but yeah.
How do you think
we're going to change the title of this podcast to "Run with This Idea if you want to"? Like, or I don't know, we could move something at the end. If you dare, if you care.
Yeah.
Do you kind of a tangential question, Ethan? I appreciate you bringing this back on track, by the way. But a tangential question here is, how do you think about this idea at this nexus of pandemic and the potential for more people to be working from home? Are there any additional opportunities available to a company who is nimble enough to adapt their offering for this new reality?
That's a great point. Yeah, I think probably, right? I mean, if you could somehow convince the world that you were the sort of like best remote first employee feedback system.
Man, I'm thinking here, like I know folks who have a job and they, literally it's just telling me, "Oh, this has been weird. We're working in home. I'm working more hours than I was when I was in the office. Everybody's like working on overtime and I don't know how to bring this up," like that kind of, we have systems to rate the traditional I'm going to the office work process and rate the employees and rate the, employers and do performance reviews, but it may be also broken because we're doing things digitally via Zoom. People are working on their own time, or they have to sit in, way more Zoom meetings than they ever thought they would ever have to. And it actually, is not good for productivity. So just kind of going in there and taking advantage that everybody's working on Zoom and working remotely right now, and say, you could even just put out like a global Zoom work survey, and find out a lot of data that probably people are itching to share about their frustrations and how they could make it better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm picturing the tagline came to mind: workplace productivity as a service, right? You come in with a system that you bolt on to someone's existing platform, and oftentimes people have not developed a remote first system for being able to measure performance. My wife had told me the other day that usually people can see her work, very similar to what Ethan is saying. You're in meetings, you're presenting it to people, you're talking about it. I mean, even just water cooler banter that doesn't happen, at least for the organizations that are not used to working remotely. It doesn't happen at all, and people are trying to figure out new ways to get credit for what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that.
Hopefully this is getting you more excited about the idea, Corey. Come on.
Well, I like to keep my ambitions sort of like very, very contained. These ideas are a little too big for me. I don't know.
So just a quick question. It's a little bit off topic from this. We got some good ideas. You could get started as a consultant. You can charge, a few $1,000s for setup. You can do a couple $100 a month for maintenance of this type of a software system. You can reach out to people cold through HR departments. So we got some things in place. I'm just curious more about you to share with people in that transition, because you've worked as a CTO, you've done independent projects. What is your day-to-day like now in terms of how you distribute the work that you do?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like there's no sort of routine. I sort of like, I wake up and I sort of look at a blank Google Doc essentially, and I'm like, what am I going to do today? And in general, like I will spend about half my week doing work for my company Dimagi, and I'll spend the other half of my week doing stuff that sort of like moves my own personal projects along. These days, I'm mostly working on the project you mentioned at the beginning, the Django SaaS template Pegasus, which I'll have to tell you what Django is. But yeah, I mean, like it's pretty flexible. I sort of just like bounce around based on what feels the most important or what I feel like doing. It's relatively unstructured, except that I am like obsessive about tracking my time, and so at the end of the day and at the end of the week, I can be very clear about where my time has gone. And I sort of like, I look at it at that macro level sort of every day and every week. And I'm like, oh, did I like actually spend, this week I wanted to spend 12 hours working on Pegasus, but this other stuff came up and I only spent 3. And then I'll be mad about that. And I'll adjust the next week or something like that. So it's sort of both very chaotic and with like this sort of backing of like rigor and data or something like that. It sounds probably a little weird, but it works for me.
How do you notate that? Do you just write that in a Google Doc or spreadsheet? Okay, I've done.
Oh, I use an app.
Okay.
I use an app for time tracking. Yeah, it's called Toggl.
Toggl,
which is a very nice time tracking app.
And then in terms of the Dimagi, is that's a business that you worked at full time previously, or are you?
Yeah.
What's your position?
Yeah. So I was full time from basically 2006 until 2017. So like 11 years. And then I took 7 months off, which is when I sort of like spun up a few of these personal projects. And then I went back half time and then sort of continued the personal side with the other half of my time.
So no, I know that there's going to be a good number of our listeners that are in that liminal position where they have a full-time job and they're trying to start a business and they, trying to figure out how to budget some time in to work on it. And, do you have any tips or suggestions on how to make that transitional process so that you have some time to develop your own business project?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think the first point is like it depends on your energy, and you have to understand your energy, like and where you get energy. And so like I think some people can work a full-time job, either loving it or, just sort of treating it as a 9 to 5, and then come home and work nights and weekends and make a side project happen. And if you have that energy and you have sort of the lifestyle and life situation that allows you to do that, that's awesome. But I think, like, for me, I didn't, and I think like a lot of people don't. And in that world, I recommend sort of finding a way, or at least what worked for me was finding a way to safely sort of like reduce your 9 to 5 to, like, a 9 to 4 or a 9 to 3 or whatever, and then sort of like give yourself the time to actually make progress on sort of these like entrepreneurial endeavors outside of work. And there's a lot of like paths to that. One that I took was to just take a sabbatical. So I just had like a hard stop, dipped into my savings a little bit. Thankfully, my wife was still working. And so then that was like a really good sort of way for me to just like get from 0 to 1 in terms of just like having something out there that had enough momentum that I could then, do it part-time. Freelancing is another good path if you have if you have sort of enough skills or a network that you can quit your job but replace some of that income with freelancing. Like, that can be pretty, especially in the like software space, which is my space. Like, you can get a pretty lucrative hourly rate from freelance work, and then sort of spend half your time freelancing, replace the income of a full-time job, and then get the other half of your time back to do something else. So I think it depends on your situation and all that. And if you have the energy to make it happen in nights, that's like power to you. That's awesome.
Tell me more about this idea of a sabbatical, because I'm familiar with it in academia, and it makes sense because these people are tenured and they could just take some time off and then come back, and it all seems so great. But like, it sounds like you negotiate with your work to just like, hey, can I have a few weeks off and then I can actually come back, or like what? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I imagine a lot of people don't have that option. And Dimagi is like a very cool company in that way, in that they're, they treat employees like quite flexibly and generously. So yeah, for me, that was an option. I think if you are a high value employee, then going and saying to your boss, like, look, I'm great. You don't want me to quit. I'm like, I want to pursue this other thing. I'm interested in it. Can I take 3 months and come back? Or, like, I think that's a company that values its employees well should say yes to that, I would think, even though, you're taking on some risk. But that was basically what I did. I negotiated, and it wasn't paid, obviously. So like, sabbatical is like a nice way of like, it makes it sound more important than like, oh, I just like didn't have a job for 7 months, which is like a lot closer to the actual truth. But I did have sort of like this. I mean, again, I'm a bit privileged in that, like, being a competent software developer is like, these days you're not really ever like worried about not being able to find a job.
That's a perfect segue. I need to ask this. Many of our listeners probably do not have a software background. What would you say to them as a piece of advice for getting an idea like this off the ground? We've talked in the past about hiring competent or outsourcing the work to a competent third-party developer. But what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I have such a bias towards learning and doing it yourself, just because that's sort of what I do. But like, these days, there's so much you can put together without even knowing how to code. Like, you can build an amazing website with, like Squarespace or Card or whatever. There's like Webflow is this product that like lets you do. I've never actually used it, but I have the sense that it lets you do sort of like even more like product-like things without having any idea how to code. And so I would say like go as far as you can with like either no code tools or even try to learn how to code if just enough to sort of like put your idea together, because it's much more accessible than you think. And honestly, like it's just as hard to learn how to manage a team, like to hire and manage a team of like outsourced developers as it is to like learn how to build a website in one of these tools. So like, why not also do the thing that like will forever unlock you to be able to do this for free in the future?
That's a great piece of advice. We normally ask at the end here, what's one thing you want our listeners to take away from this conversation? Can you top what you just shared, or is that the thing?
Good question. Nothing's coming up off the top of my head. So
yeah. So I'll just say, we normally ask what's one thing you want our listeners to take away from this conversation, but that was such a good reply that we're just going to use that and let you sign off with that. So to the listener out there, good. We're going to, who likes this idea and wants to run with it, do so. Follow through on some of the action steps that we outlined. Email us at update@runwithit.fm. And everyone who does email in will receive access to a private Facebook group of action takers. One lucky listener will earn a free mentoring session with Corey, and potentially you can convince him to do a business partnership around this idea. Corey?
He doesn't want to do the majority of it, so.
well, no, I'll just build the whole product for you. I mean,
and you can do all the parts of the other line. Yeah. That sounds pretty good. Corey, where can people go to find out more about you?
Yeah, you can go to just my website. It's Corey without an E, so CORY ZUE.com, or I'm CZU on Twitter. And those are sort of the places where I hang out the most.
Okay, great.
Perfect.
Well, Corey, yeah, it's been a pleasure talking with you. Thank you for sharing this idea with our listeners for them to run with. Looking forward to hearing from them about some of the actions that they've taken. And enjoy the conversation. Enjoy that beer that you wanted to get.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. This was fun.
Awesome. Talk to you later on.
All right. Bye.
All right, I'll send us off Facebook here.
Okay, cool. And let me make sure.